And welcome to this meeting of the Licensing and Safety Subcommittee. I am Michelle Parker, Legal Executive advising the committee. I'm obliged to inform you this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to view the meeting using the link on the agenda. Everyone that speaks during the meeting is asked to introduce themselves each time they speak, so those listening know who is speaking. To ensure that those watching the live stream can hear, could all participants please ensure they switch their microphone off prior to speaking. I will now turn to the agenda. The first item on the agenda being election of a chair. Therefore, could I seek nominations, please?
Councillor Colin Taylor. I nominate Councillor Nigel Lumby to be chairman for this duration.
Could I seek someone to second that, please?
Councillor Grattan, I will second that.
Nigel Lumby has therefore been nominated as chair for this committee.
Okay then, thank you, councillors. So going through the items on the agenda, item 2 is apologies, and we've had one apology from Councillor Peter Husserman. So item 3 is public questions. Are there any public questions? Item 4 is disclosable pecuniary interest. Members are reminded that they must declare their disclosable pecuniary interests and other registrable or non-registrable interests in any matter being considered at the meeting as set out in Appendix B of the Members' Code of Conduct, and consider if they should leave the room prior to the item being considered. Further advice can be sought from the monitoring officer and advice of the meeting. Anybody got to declare anything? Okay, thank you. So the meeting today is in relation to the Explosives Regulation 2014 application for local authority assent. So we'll do introductions. I'm Councillor Nigel Lumby and I represent Albrighton.
So I'm Councillor Rhys Grattan, I represent Halscott.
I'm Councillor Colin Taylor and I represent Bridgenorth South and Alverley.
Hi, I'm Councillor Mark Owen and I represent Oswestry South East.
Michelle Parker, Housing and Licensing Lawyer for Shropshire Council.
Jessica Moores, Public Protection Officer in the licensing team for Shropshire Council.
I'm Graham Kirkpatrick. I'm the Managing Director of Mosaic Laboratories, the applicant.
I'm Louise Phillips. I work for Mosaic. I'm the Office Manager.
I'm Stuart Charles. I'm a Principal Specialist Inspector with the Health and Safety Executive. I manage the Operational Inspection Team for the south of the UK.
So I'm Dr. Nathan Flood. I'm also a Principal Specialist Inspector of Explosives with the Health and Safety Executive, and I manage the portfolio team of experts across the explosive sector who support the operational teams on technical matters.
I'm Matthew Davis. I am an Explosives Permissioning Officer with the Health and Safety Executive. I did the majority of the work on this draft licence.
Okay, thank you, everybody. The committee has read and considered the representations submitted by all parties in relation to the application. Therefore, presentations should be succinct and kept to a brief summary of key points. There is no need to read out written representations or reiterate the details of written representations at great length. The Chair will intervene if it is felt that presentations are becoming overly long, are getting off track, or do not relate specifically to local factors bearing on the safety of the operation of the site or the health and safety of members of the public. Each speaker has a maximum of 3 minutes. The procedure for the hearing was provided to you. There are a couple of printed ones if required. In general, we will aim to keep to this order of business to ensure the timely and fair conduct of the hearing for all parties. If it is felt necessary during the course of the hearing, the committee may make the decision to deviate from the procedure. This is at the committee's discretion. There are opportunities throughout the hearing for each party to ask questions of others following their presentations. Please ensure that you use this opportunity to ask questions only and not to make any further points or statements. It's for the chair to decide if questions are appropriate and relate to the matter in hand. Any behaviour considered to be disruptive by the chair may lead to parties being asked to leave the hearing. Does anyone have any question regarding the hearing process or how the hearing will be conducted? No, thank you. So, question to the licensing officer, has any of the representations made been withdrawn?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Would any party present like to withdraw their representation? No. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the licence officer presenting the report, then please.
Thank you, Chair. You're here today to consider an application for assent to an application made to Health and Safety Executive for a licence to manufacture and store explosives. Throughout the process, the applicants completed what was required of them for the assent procedure, and the local authority delegations require you now to make a decision on this application. So the purpose of the local authority assent procedure is for the local authority to satisfy itself that any local factors bearing on the safety of the operation of the site or the health and safety of members of the public have been considered and taken into account by HSE in the setting of the licence conditions. Matters not relevant to the safety of the site and health and safety of members of the public cannot be considered by the local authority in making the decision whether to assent to the application. At the end of this process, you will have the opportunity to deliberate, and your options are to assent to the application, to assent with the addition of conditions, or to withhold assent.
So we now go to questions for the licensing officer, and we'll start with any objectors. Now, if anybody wants to ask any questions, if you could come forward to the seat there with the microphone and ask the questions of the licensing officer only, please. Anybody got one? The one that just spoke, yes, sorry. Jessica Moore.
I don't know whether I'm doing this right, because I've got a look, and I'm expecting...
Could you just tell me your name first?
Michelle Wilkes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm expecting answers, I suppose, from our objections to be met, but there was something that came up and I thought I needed to speak about it. So on the 29th of April, there was a huge fire on site from 3:30 until 6:14. It was a very warm, sunny day and we hoped to sit out in the garden, but instead had to get the washing in, close all windows. Ash rained down in the garden and the smoke was thick. Is this where the permanent...
Excuse me, Mrs. Wilkes. Where's the question there? It has to relate to what you've just heard.
It is.
Really.
It is. Is this where the permanent burning hearth area is to be situated? And how often do we expect disposal of explosive waste and waste contaminated with explosives by burning to take place?
Mrs. Wilkes,
yes.
I think it's a question for the applicant because the licensing officer may not know anything about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you'll come back when the applicant's
all right.
said their bit.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've got another one then. I at the very end, you said you were happy that they'd completed their consultation regulations properly, but we had a first mistake with the consultation zone. The second, which I feel has really put things adrift, is that the applicant posted a letter that when they were told they got to widen their consultation, the letter that was posted through most of the village's doors has bias. It has bias. It reads as bias. It mentions small scale twice, I think, on there. And this was redacted, and obviously everybody then received a second letter that said ignore everything that went before. And of course, I think this is really sort of downplayed. A lot of people in the village still don't know
what this application is about, what's going to be there, and they probably read that, oh, it's a small scale operation, didn't even bother to go to the village hall to look at things. So I do feel that I haven't been happy with that anyway. Okay.
In terms of the process that's been carried out, what needed to happen has happened. The content of that isn't a matter for us as the licensing authority, because the regulations make it a responsibility of the applicant to give those notifications. So they weren't approved by us or sent by us.
But HSE happy?
Sorry, you can't just swap who you're asking the question. The questions were to licensing officer. You'll get a chance to ask that later. Okay, thank you. Any other objector want to come forward and ask at this stage? No, thank you. So the applicant, any questions to the licensing officer?
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions. The first question is, you received a number of representations against the licence, which you forwarded to the HSE. Did they offer you guidance about those representations? Did you ask them if they had considered, if there was any issue in the representations that they had not considered when they drafted their licence for Mosaic?
We've sought appropriate guidance from HSE. If this is a question around whether or not we made the decision to come to a hearing based on the advice we were given by HSE, Shropshire Council's delegations require that a hearing is held for an application of this nature if there are representations.
Thank you. The second question is, you said in a subsequent communication that you had consulted with other local authorities which had held public hearings for in similar situations. Can you tell me which local authorities you consulted, please?
We have found other examples of local authorities who've had hearings in relation to these applications. Off the top of my head, no, I can't tell you what they are, but we can tell you, yes.
You will communicate those to me in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So same to the HSE. Any questions of the licensing officer? Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions? Okay then, moving on. So the applicant to present their case then, please. Just a reminder, you've got 3 minutes.
Mosaic Laboratories is a small-scale company carrying out research and development activities on behalf of the Ministry of Defence and other UK defence contractors as part of the UK onshore rearmament programme. The kind of work carried out by Mosaic and others will allow the UK to catch up in areas of defence technology that it has neglected for several decades. Small and medium-sized enterprises can make rapid progress in this endeavour, and Mosaic was formed for this purpose, to set up a small shape charge capability. The scale of the activities will be much smaller than a conventional filling factory, as the emphasis is on technological development and proof of concept rather than serial production. And it's not really suitable that this kind of work is carried out in an existing filling factory, which is set up to make mass quantities of a few products. In terms of additional explosives traffic, therefore, in and around the site, we're talking in the order of a transit van per month. The bulk of our practical work will be around the validation and computer modelling of small items, 200 and 500 grams. None of these items will be tested on site. The testing referred to in the application relates in the main to chemical tests of compositions on less than a gram. But it is important to appreciate that no testing will have a noise signature attached to it will be audible by any resident or any business. The conditions of the draft licence do not permit us to carry out any explosions at the site. The nature of the compositions themselves are inherently stable. Although they are designed as high-performance military explosives, it is extremely difficult to make them perform as such by accident. When placed in a fire, they will burn rather than explode. This is not necessarily the case with other types of explosives which feature in the news from time to time, such as fireworks. These kind of explosives are not permitted to be manufactured by Mosaic. Mosaic is owned and operated by individuals with a combined experience in explosive manufacture, test and evaluation of over 50 years. The explosives industry is highly regulated, and the competence and experience of the individuals operating the site is taken into account when issuing a license, as well as the suitability of the site itself. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to questions, and the order on the paper is licensing officer first.
No, thank you, Chair.
HSE. So this is now objectors. If anybody wants to come and ask any questions of Mr. Fitzpatrick. Thank you. Just say your name again.
Okay, Michelle Wilkes. Okay, so as I said previously, on the 29th of April, there was a huge fire on site. It did rain ash into my garden. We had to close all windows, so did my neighbours, and we had to go inside. It was a sunny, bright day, and it was in the middle of the day. And now I've read that RDX can cause seizures in humans and animals if breathed in or ingested, and some people can have changes to blood pressure, and it can affect crops. HMX affects the liver and nervous system if swallowed or gets into the skin. Ash from burning waste contaminated with HMX can be carried by the wind for some distance.
Wilkes, can we get to a question, because we're reading a statement out.
Okay.
So you want to know about the fire?
Yeah, I want to know whether this is going to be a regular thing, whether there is a health and safety risk to me breathing in or having ash land on me, whether the environment will be contaminated.
The fire to which you refer had nothing to do with Mosaic Laboratories. The site is not operational. There is no explosives on the site. And to answer a previous question that you asked, you said, is the location or was the location of the fire where the permanent burn hearth is going to be? And the answer, no, it isn't. And there will not be a fire, any fires of that scale due to Mosaic operations. We are not permitted to have a fire that size. That fire was carried out by the landlord as he has a grant from the local authority, from the council, to conduct coppicing operations, which he had not carried out for a number of years, but has carried them out recently, and he was burning brash resulting from those operations.
Will you be doing that when you're there?
No, we will not be permitted to do that when we're there, because the site will be regulated such that any burning activity must take place only in a regulated place.
And will those chemicals perhaps contaminate the air?
There is no. Our operations will not allow a ground contamination.
What about air contamination?
Mr.
Kirkpatrick, if I can just...
I beg your pardon.
Yeah, no, if I can just intercede here. I think he's answered to say the fires have nothing to do with him. They're brush fires. They're brush fires, and he's answered the question.
There's going to be a permanent burning place where they'll burn these materials contaminated with the HMX and RDX. So, although I accept that that may not have been his fire, the permanent burning place that he is going to have, will we be exposed to these dangerous carcinogens? That's my question.
So, do you want to answer that part of it then?
No, I don't believe you will, because the materials will be thoroughly combusted, and the products of combustion do not have the properties to which you have referred.
I'm not convinced. Okay. Am I allowed any more questions or not?
I take it really you're the spokesperson for everybody at this, stage.
I'm happy for anybody to come up and speak. That's great.
So that's why I'm giving you a little bit of leeway as to the amount of questions.
I think I probably live the very nearest is what my issue is. That's the thing. Okay. The other thing is the draft licence was made and the agreement the landowner will not develop or sublet any land within the Class D distances, and yet the Esden School, while you were devising the draft licence, wasn't there. Did the landowner, did he adhere to the terms of the draft licence by subletting that?
By the look of you looking round to the HSE, that's a question for them.
Okay, will they be,
And not,
will
so
they be
not
speaking?
now.
That's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Can separation distances be met?
Yes.
Expansion of the site, what might this entail?
I can't see into the future. I don't know how the business will progress.
It's been recorded that there's going to be a view to expand. So
Well, the draft license has been constructed with a possible expansion in mind, so that we don't have to repeat or we don't have to submit a variation, which can take a long time to process. It doesn't mean, of course, that the additional buildings will be built. We can have a site license that is never built. It depends on the work, but I'd ask you to consider that just because there may be more buildings, it doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be an uptick, a significant uptick in activity, because explosive processing buildings are generally for one process only, and so it doesn't mean that there'll be multiple processes going on all of the time. It simply means that there is an additional process that can be carried out that requires its particular building for it.
And the site already houses a firework facility, and gas tankers and fertiliser trucks drive through the industrial estate, and there's the close proximity to Severn Trent, which I'm not sure whether there's a methane risk. To what extent has the risk of fire or explosion to prevent the spreading of fire and explosion and the communication explosions from one location to another? You think a HSE one again?
I respectfully say
Okay,
that's for the
fine.
HSE to answer.
Okay. I mean, the other one for me is just the mental health of having that at the back of my garden. Literally, I look out my bedroom window and I can see where you've been digging.
I don't think that's a question you can ask.
It isn't a question, but for my but mental health is also health and safety. I'm just letting you know that
you'll get an opportunity to say all this when you get to your stage where you can say.
Okay,
this
thank
is
you then.
purely questions. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay.
And committee then, I think, next. Was there any? Yes, sorry, sir. If you can just state your name, please.
Alan Jones, can you hear me now? Right, couple of things. The first question is, listen to the comment about a single transit van going through the village once a month. It passes within 2 feet of my stone wall. The concern is, how safe is my property with that explosive going to and from on a regular basis? That's question one, which I'll leave it to answer before I go to question two.
So the nature of the compositions mean that although they can perform in a high performance way, they can detonate with a high velocity of detonation. It's extremely difficult to get them to perform that way unless they receive a particular stimulus. That particular stimulus will not be dropping them from a height, bashing them against a wall, or even setting fire to them.
Right, because there have been 4 head-on collisions right outside my property and the Howard Arms in the last 12 months. One was a police chase, but concern is if you're going every month to and from, not only is the base materials going into the property, you're then delivering completed mixes in back out of the facility. So is that more combustible then, or I'm sure it is because obviously you're working on it then.
It is more combustible. What I would say though is that unlike a van load of fireworks, which should they catch fire, they will violently explode, our items will not. They will burn steadily.
Right, but obviously it's still within 2 feet of my wall.
Well,
okay. That's the first you've answered. Second question is, I can although planning permission hasn't been approved as yet, I noticed there's a lot of work going on the site with your building work and other excavations. And it appears like you're jumping the gun regarding the approval, that you're already working as if you've got the approval before even we've had a hearing.
So where's the question there? Because you've made a statement.
That was a question to him. It looks like you're carrying on. Yes or no?
You've got to understand that
the question is,
sir,
as you haven't had approval yet, why are you carrying on?
The process is that this is one process. The police will have another process because it's firearms and explosive.
Yeah.
And planning will have another one. You don't go one and then you wait for the other and then the other.
Okay, but I'd have assumed with common sense that until all the approvals are in place, work doesn't proceed. I couldn't build a house without getting a council approval. Well, I'm just asking the question.
The contract that we that was placed on us required us to have a facility operational within a certain time frame. Now that would that requirement would not have been able to be delivered had we had to wait for all the licenses and approvals. And so the decision was taken and it was agreed by our sponsor that we should proceed at risk, knowing that there was a risk that the license may not be approved. That was a risk that they were willing to take.
Okay. Understood. And so that's why initially very few people were notified about the plant, A, to keep it secret, and B, to allow you to proceed without common knowledge in the village. That's a statement. Okay.
Yeah. Took the words out of my mouth then, sir. So, any more questions? No? Okay, thank you. If you could state your name first.
James Wilkes. So I've been in the village 23 years. The industrial estate we're talking has the doors wide open all the time. If you drive to the end of it, it has a very small sign and a flimsy fence saying no public access, but it's not very secure. There's been break-ins. A lot of fireworks were stolen last year. Is it going to be secure enough that no one can break in and steal what you're actually making?
The gates to which you refer have recently been replaced by an electronic security gate. So you have to have a telephone access to open that gate. Our site itself is secured with a second electronic gate. We also have a comprehensive security system that's been agreed with the West Mercia explosive licensing officer, explosive liaison officer, I beg your pardon, and also the counter-terrorism officer. It's not beyond the wit of possibility that an intruder will be able to access the site. I don't believe that a vehicle can access the site.
If it's only small quantities, if they did break in, it could be stolen.
We judging on the time that our security alarms will be alerted and the police response time, it's the belief that the intruder would be apprehended.
You don't think they would get away in time because most police are in Shrewsbury or Kidderminster or wherever it is? It's quite a long way, isn't it, to get to Ditton?
Well, in the formation of a security system, you have it's a layered approach, so that there's an alert that there's an intruder on the premises, and then there'll be a certain time frame that the intruder needs to spend in order to access material which they may decide to steal, and those security layers have been assessed with the probable response time.
And that goes with all the other buildings you're adding as well. So there's up to 7. Is that correct?
Well, there's the security situation surrounding each building will be different because It's not the case that materials will be left overnight in all of the buildings.
The fence there is quite flimsy when you look at it. Is that going to be secured, or is it just the gates?
We are constructing additional fencing where we have agreed with the police that it is required.
And what about the other access by the Esland School? Because there's an access there from the gate down to you can get round to it the other way. Is that going to be secured?
I don't believe that you can get down there with a vehicle.
But people can.
I don't believe you can. Right. I'll rephrase that. I don't believe that you can access our part of the site with a vehicle from that or any
So
other
you don't
direction.
know, basically.
I don't, well, when I say I don't believe it, I don't think it's the case, because we've been in discussion with the landowner who has replaced what was an open gate at the bottom of the site.
Because it's open access, you can get to it. So it's just security, obviously, is quite if it's going to go ahead, security is quite important.
It is important, yes.
So you're happy with the security yourself? Would you be happy with that security if it was at the back of your house, that it's fine and no one could break in?
Yes, I would, yeah.
You would?
Yes.
That's it, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wilkes, thank you. Anybody else? State your name at the beginning, please.
So my name is Gary Alton. I'm the chairman of Ditton Prize Village Hall. I'm a resident that lives on Brown-Clee Road, and I've got an industrial estate unit on the industrial estate as well. My first question is, can you tell me why I didn't receive a letter when you sent the letters out, and I didn't know anything about it until I saw it posted on Facebook? And I've got 3 buildings within 800 metres of your site.
Yes, I can. The assent process in our mind required us to leaflet all residences and buildings within a public consultation. And the radius of that zone was twice the largest building separation distance. Now, we believe that to be somewhat ambiguous because we don't have any, if you like, Class E buildings in the vicinity. So the separation distance that we took and then doubled for the consultation zone was the Class D distance. And when we plotted that out on the map, there were very few premises that required to be leafleted. That was picked up by explosive licensing, who said you must rerun that process because you've not picked the right consultation zone distance. So as the licensing officer has already said, the process was rerun. You did receive a leaflet, and the assent process carried on from there. So it was a mistake on our part, which we rectified.
It's just that it appeared to be like underhand. There was a row of 5 houses at the bottom. I think 2 houses had letters and the other 3 didn't. And then
Alton, that's not a question, that's you making a statement.
Yeah, no worries. Secondly, the transit van size, I know we're just using this as an example that's going to be coming through the village. Obviously, you've said about explosives and being low risk. Will there be any chemicals transported through the village which may spill, or it's my little lads at the school, which it's going to have to drive past? So will there be any chemicals transported through the village?
There will be some chemicals, yes.
Because that's a concern. The roads in the village are absolutely horrendous. Bad potholes, big tractors. Obviously, I don't know what time of day these vehicles are going to be coming in and out. But
Mr. Alton, what's the question, please?
The question is, will there be chemicals? The next question is, will the transit van size vehicle get bigger as you get bigger? Because it's all right saying it's transit van size now, but obviously if you expand, then there'll be more coming in and out, more chemicals, more warheads, more explosive.
It's unlikely to get much bigger because the scale of the operation itself is small. It's nothing like a conventional explosive filling factory. And the reason for that is that we're limited by the amount of materials that we can store. The quantity of materials that a conventional filling factory would store would probably be around about 100, 150 tons. We are 25 times less than that. We can only store a small amount, and that will necessarily limit the scale of our operations. As I said, the bulk of our practical work will be around items that are that size, which will be made on site, filled on site, and then taken away for testing at another location.
Okay. Obviously, you are putting security on site. I'm on site all the time because my unit's on the industrial estate, so I can see you've put a gate in. There is definitely another way in to the back end of the wood yard, which isn't currently secure. We do have regular break-ins, stuff going missing, all sorts of problems. I've been involved with a vehicle that's come in that way and got stuck in the field, and we've had to drag it out. So you definitely can drive a vehicle in from the back. So I think that's something that you need to look at. My other last question is, I've also been out in the last couple of weeks trying to find a drone that was flying over the estate in the middle of the night, which I'm sure was nothing to do with you guys. How can you secure it from that side of things if it was, say, somebody flying a drone, doing something with a drone that they weren't supposed to be doing, which is 800 metres away from my house?
I don't know about the drone activity to which you're referring.
But how can you, drones are a thing, aren't they, at the moment? So how can you secure the site against somebody doing something with a drone that they're not supposed to be doing?
I'm not able to achieve that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more objectors? No. Okay, so no, sorry, no, you can't. No.
At some stage,
You should have put a representation in, so that could have been for it, a neutral or against, but the fact that you didn't means you can't speak today. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so we've told you now, that's it, so sorry. Committee, have you got anything you want to say? Anybody else?
Councillor Mark Owen, my own peace of mind. You answered the question about the transport of the chemicals coming in. I didn't quite catch the answer in terms of if, unfortunately, there was an accident and these chemicals were released going through the village. Is it likely that there's going to be a pollution incident, or as far as you're aware, has that been taken into account with other parties? Bit of a vague question, sorry.
Well, the carriage of dangerous goods requires that all chemicals which fall into a dangerous goods category are required to be packaged appropriately, so that will mitigate against spillage and pollution.
That's great. Thank you.
Not all of the chemicals that we will transport will be hazardous. Some chemicals are actually used in the food industry.
Yeah. But there's going to be a mixture there, presumably, of inert and packaged materials that could cause problems, yes? They are suitably packaged so that they will.
Yes, and they're also in very small quantities, because we don't require, apart from the base explosives to which you've referred, RDX and HMX, we don't require many other chemicals.
That's great, thank you.
So if we move on now to the Health and Safety Executive, if you'd like to present your case, please, and state your name at the beginning. Thank you.
Just to clarify, we have more than 3 minutes, do we? Because to explain some of this, we're going to need more than 3 minutes to provide some of the support to you, or we can give a quick overview and then we can get into more detail from the questions. It's whatever the chair and the committee would prefer.
Well, I'll try and be succinct as possible, but as you will understand, it is quite complex, the explosive licensing framework, as I'm sure everyone around here appreciates. So just to introduce myself, Dr. Nathan Flood. So I'm a Principal Specialist Inspector of Explosives for the Health and Safety Executive. So my role in HSE is...
Sorry, can you put the microphone perhaps a little bit nearer to you? Your voice isn't quite as loud.
Thank you. Is that better? Can everyone hear? Sorry about that. Yeah. So, Dr. Nathan Flood, I'm a Principal Specialist Inspector of Explosives with the Health and Safety Executive. So my main role is to provide technical expertise to other government departments, the HSE and my operational colleagues. As part of that, there are various things that sit in my role with regards to support of the explosive regulatory framework. Now, there are a few matters that have been raised around health and safety, which cover a few different bits of the explosives regulatory framework. So I thought it would be useful if I just explain a little bit about some of that to give people a bit of a context. I will be upfront and say I will omit some information because otherwise we would be here for a number of weeks if I was going through all of this. But what I would say, if there's any clarifications anybody needs in any of this, please do ask me a question and I'll try and explain it the best I can. So I will cover the explosive licensing framework to begin with, and I think it is important to understand sort of a bit about the background and how this works. I appreciate people who aren't in the explosives business aren't very familiar with how it's been developed and how it's been structured, so I'll try and give a bit of context for that. The other thing that's probably important is for everyone to understand a little bit about how there is a framework that sits behind the licensing framework, about how health and safety is managed across Great Britain, and I will pass over to my colleague Mr. Stuart Charles to give a bit of more context around that in a second. So there have been statutory measures for limiting the consequences of accidental explosions of stored gunpowder since 1718. In 1875, the Explosive Act was enacted and introduced, which established a licensing framework and the Explosives Inspectorate, which we are now a part of. We used to be part of the Home Office, we're now part of the Health and Safety Executive. As new types of explosives were developed and the effects of accidental explosions were studied more systematically, explosives were classified on the basis of their predominant hazards. These pretty much fall into three major categories: blast, which has been mentioned a little bit, fragmentation, and also thermal effects as well. So this work enabled the authorities to publish minimum safety distances deemed sufficient to protect people and property at sites exposed to the potential effects of various quantities of each type of explosives, because different explosives will have different predominant hazards. The system of safety distances and the categories were reviewed by the Ministry of Defence and the Explosives Inspectorate after World War II, and common safety distance tables applicable to both military and commercial explosives were agreed. And essentially the British framework has been adopted across a lot of the world, and that work has been developed as part of NATO countries, and there's further work that is still ongoing to this day in that manner. For mass exploding explosives, the quantity distances were based on formulae derived from an analysis of damage effects collated from incidents of wartime bombing and accidental explosions. These distances were further reviewed in the early 2000s due to the results of trials carried out in the 1990s using a variety of magazine types and associated net explosive quantities, or NEQs as is commonly known. And that ranged from about 10 to 250 kilograms of explosives. And that work was undertaken by the MOD, so Ministry of Defence, and other nations, and the trials were conducted in Australia. The data from all of those trials suggested that the quantity of debris generated in an explosion and the distances to which it would be thrown could be considerably greater than had previously been thought, especially for small brick and concrete stores. And that's primarily because the bricks, as the concrete breaks apart that holds it together, basically act as a projectile and get thrown large distances, essentially. The distances did also at that time not take into account the numbers of people at risk. The same distances would apply whether the protected works were a single house or a high density housing estate. So that information and that trial data fed into a recalculation of the safety distances that were put in place as part of the explosive licensing framework, and that's built into them. And we'll get on to Class D, and I suspect there might be some questions from people around some of this. So that's kind of the history. So when HSE reviewed the explosives regulatory framework around licensing around 2014, we published what is known as the HSE's Statement of Purpose for HSE's explosive licensing regime, which if the committee doesn't have a copy of, we can certainly provide a copy for your consideration because it outlines sort of the key steps in the background of this. So, and I'm going to read this through because hopefully it will give people specific information. The worldwide history of the explosive sector includes numerous sudden, often unexpected and incompletely explained catastrophic incidents. Experience indicates that the inherent properties of explosives mean that it is often difficult or impossible to avoid an incident once an initiating event has taken place. HSE, along with regulators around the world, recognises that the manufacture and storage of explosives often results in high, sustained and broadly based levels of societal concern over the potential risks of harm associated with that manufacture and storage, and with the associated explosives activities that can be located with them. This concern can be related to events associated with the manufacture and storage of explosives that have often resulted in multiple fatalities from a single event. For these reasons, and in line with HSE's approach set out in our approach to permissioning regimes, formal licensing by regulatory authorities of the manufacture and storage of explosives and the associated explosives activities that can be located with them is appropriate. HSE's licensing regime for the manufacture and storage of explosives provides proportionate oversight of licensees' risk controls and allows specific activities with clear societal benefits to proceed by requiring that a site or the places within it are suitable for the manufacture and storage of explosives proposed or being undertaken, requiring that a person manufacturing or storing explosives is fit, ensuring that the residual risk to people from the manufacture and storage of explosives and the associated explosives activities located with them are tolerable, provided that relevant good practice is followed. Ensuring that the public are properly consulted before explosive licenses are either granted or changed. HSE also recognises the significant potential for misuse that explosives have. The requirement for a licence will identify locations where explosives are being stored in significant quantities and enable compliance with appropriate security standards to be checked. Part of it is not particularly relevant in this case, but just for completeness, assisting in planning decisions to ensure that the consequences of incidents on sites licensed for the manufacture and storage of explosives are mitigated. And that's part of our role under planning licensing regulations, that HSE are a statutory consultee with any further planning permissions that are sort of in the adjacent area of the site. So HSE achieves this by undertaking appropriate checks on locations when an application for the manufacture and storage of explosives has been received, undertaking appropriate checks on people and companies who apply to it for a licence to identify whether there is any valid evidence why they should not be granted a licence, setting licence conditions to ensure that the amount of explosives and the places on a site where they can be present are appropriate to the location, the activity and the surrounding environment. Being transparent with applicants by ensuring that each licence is supported by an appropriate justification that puts any licence conditions into context. Providing support to the local authority assent process when requested. Actively monitoring its delivery of licensing work to ensure that work is progressed in a timely and efficient way. Providing land use planning advice to local authorities in relation to development near to the sites that it licenses, and undertaking a targeted risk-based programme of inspections to ensure that the licensing conditions are being complied with and that relevant good practice has been followed. HSE does not routinely expect to include conditions on a licence that would generally be considered to comprise relevant good practice in wider health and safety legislation or relevant good practice in the safety and security provisions of the Explosives Regulation 2014. I'll cover the security aspects and some of the transport aspects in a second, but to save my voice for a second, I shall pass over Mr. Charles to give some of the context around the wider health and safety practice.
Stuart Charles, Principal Specialist Inspector. So Like any workplace within this country, Mosaic would be subject to the requirements of the Health and Safety Work Act, and the requirements there to make the employer takes all reasonably practical measures to protect the health and safety not only of their staff, but also those who might be affected by their activities. So part of our framework would be to regulate against the Health and Safety at Work Act. There's specific regulations which are made under that act, and they would include acts like regulations such as the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, and you'd be familiar with the requirement to do risk assessment for everything you do. So that's a piece of legislation that derives that requirement, and that also deals with people's competence to manage the activities that they are undertaking. Specifically for explosives, it's the Explosive Regulations 2014, and that's what enacts the requirement to have a license if you want to store and manufacture explosives. And it sets out the scheduled tables you would have seen, the QD distances that say how far things have to be from other things. Again, there's a specific regulation under that which mirrors really the Health and Safety at Work Act section 2 and 3 about taking all appropriate measures to prevent a fire and explosion, or to prevent the communication of that fire and explosion to other locations. And again, it would be the HSE who would regulate the compliance with those requirements and the requirements of the license to make sure that they're complied with in a number of means, most notably by on-site inspections of sites. The work we do is supported by published guidance. So there's specific guidance that we publish on the explosive regulations, but also we draw on guidance that is published by MOD and by industry guidance and industry bodies that have come together to produce guidelines for companies such as Mosaic.
Thank you, Dr. Nathan Flood again. So the license process itself, I don't think it's worth reiterating that, because we're at part of that process under assent now, but we do have a handbook which I'm aware that some of the representations had referred to, which outlines our policies and procedures on how we license explosive sites. As part of that framework, we have the separation distances that I referred to earlier. And from HSE's perspective, in the drafting of this license, all of the properties that we would class in the local village and the areas around it meet significantly greater than Class D distances, and quite a lot of the properties, even though we're not applying vulnerable building distance, which is a Class E distance, a lot of them sit outside of that as well. I'm sure there'll be some specific questions to us around that, so I won't go into too much detail now, other than to say we would not have drafted the licence if we weren't content that the appropriate separation distance framework had been met. Because that's part of our procedure, we wouldn't do that. I just want to cover two other things just quickly. Security has been mentioned. When a site stores what we call relevant explosives, which are essentially relevants that aren't listed in Schedule 2 of the explosives regulations, the individual or the company require an explosive certificate from the police. Most people refer to it as an acquire or an acquire and keep certificate. A company, for example, may dispose of their explosives at a farm. The farmer might have an acquire certificate for that site, but he's going to burn the explosives, so he's not going to keep them. So they would only need an acquire certificate. If you're going to acquire and store, you would need an acquire and keep certificate. Because the explosives under this site are relevant explosives, as Mr. Kirkpatrick has outlined, the police have visited the scene and they will be providing an explosive certificate to the site. And from HSE's perspective, as long as Mosaic Laboratories operate under the requirements of the explosive certificate, we would be content that the security precautions for that site would be appropriate. It's probably also helpful to the committee to say we are unaware of any theft of explosives from a HSE licensed site of relevant explosives, I should clarify, since the 1970s. So we have no examples of when that has happened. Finally, I just want to cover transport, because there's been a couple of questions, and I will
although some of it's out of my remit, Mr. Owen, I'll try and clarify some of the chemistry bit as well. And just in that, so the first thing I should say is that if you think the explosive licensing framework can be complicated, the transport framework's very complicated. So this is when I said I'm definitely going to omit some information. Essentially, as part of the United Nations, there is a transport of dangerous goods. It's now called the Energetic Working Group, but it was called the Explosive Working Group. I represented the United Kingdom on that for a number of years. It's now one of my colleagues that does that. What we do there is we have conversations around explosives, safety and transportation, along with regulatory bodies from across the United Nations and industry from the United Nations. All that information feeds into the United Nations, and for the sake of simplicity, some of it gets fed down into what's called the Agreement for the Carriage of Dangerous Goods, or ADR as it's collectively known. There are 2 volumes of ADR. I have copies of them here. As you can see, they are very large documents, and these concern the transport of dangerous goods, and that is class 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Class 1 is explosives. Now, in Great Britain, HSE is identified as the competent authority for Class 1 dangerous goods under the Carriage and Use of Transportable Pressure Equipment Regulations 2009. Regulation 5 of that says that you have to comply with ADR. If you are not complying with ADR, you are in breach of the regulations. So the reason that's really important, I think, in some of the questions that have been asked is, in order to classify an explosive to be transported by road, it has to undergo a series of testing. And the most relevant parts of the testing are what we call Test Series 3, Test Series 4, and Test Series 6. So every explosive that is classified, whether it is a substance or an article, will have gone through appropriate testing as part of the United Nations framework. Now, if it's just an explosive substance and it's not in an article, so RDX and HMX got mentioned. So if you want to transport RDX and HMX on the road, you have to do a series of testing under Test Series 3, which are essentially small scale, and we call them sensitiveness tests. So it's looking at, if you hit the explosive with a hammer, will it go bang? If you set it on fire, will it go bang? You're making an assessment of the initiating incidents that could take place with that explosive. So essentially the answer to Test Series 3 is, are they stable explosives? And if you have an explosive that is not stable, it cannot go on the road. There is no exemption from that, apart from for very small bases of safety. So if something was found somewhere, emergency services do have some derogations where they can remove it and get rid of it. But all explosives that go on the road have to pass that criteria. The next criteria is Test Series 4, and that is, the question is it safe to transport? So the first thing is, there is what's called a thermal stability test. So you hold the item, the substance or the article in its package form at 75 degrees for 48 hours. And you're looking to see if there's any change of the material and does it go bang, essentially. But the most critical one, I think, to some of the comments that we've read in the written representations is the Test Series 4B2 test in this case. The 4B1 is a liquid test, whereas the 2 is a solid test. It's a drop test. So every explosive to be classified as safe to transport on the road, in its packaging that is presented for transport, is dropped 12 metres. And that is seen as the worst case scenario, because essentially if you're taking it off of a ship onto a quayside, it's about 12 metres to the ground. So every explosive has to pass that, and if it doesn't pass that, then you can't put it on the road. I keep mentioning by road because ADR concerns by road, but a lot of the other regulatory framework do refer to the same tests. It's just we're talking about road in this case. Test Series 6, probably the most interesting test for people in the room, is the Test Series 6C, which is a bonfire test, which essentially identifies if the material's in a fire, how is it going to behave? And the way that all of this framework works is that if the emergency services respond to an incident, they know how to deal with that material. So they will have an automatic, it's usually, the fire service do vary on this a little bit, but their initial emergency response is, if it's a 1.1, so there's a mass explosion hazard, or a 1.2, a single projection hazard, they would put a 600 metre cordon in place. The next one, it would be a 1.3 or a 1.4. So essentially a thermal hazard or a minor fire hazard. Essentially, they would bring the exclusion zone in, essentially. And that also then has information within the documentation on how to treat those incidents. So that's how the framework's managed. So from a HSE perspective, the representations around the safety on the road would fall outside the licensing framework because it would come under the classification for transport under the transport of dangerous goods framework. Now, Mr. Owen, I will do my best because although I'm a chemist, I don't tend to deal with too much with the chemical transport, but different chemicals will also be classified under the transport of dangerous goods framework. So they could be oxidizers, they could be flammable materials, and what all of that framework does, it makes sure that markings are placed on there. The emergency services know how to deal with them based on their United Nations number, and my knowledge of what Mosaic is proposing to do with regards to the chemicals, I would assume they're probably talking about small bottles which have been bought from suppliers, which will have been packaged in certain ways, but that is supposition on my part. But just I hope that sort of gives a bit of clarification, but obviously I'll be happy to take more questions. I've covered a lot of information there, so I'm happy to take questions and clarify as wherever people would like. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Licensing officer. Okay, applicant.
Yes, I've got one question. Graham Kirkpatrick again, applicant. The licence application was first submitted in December 2023 with a site visit by HSE in March of 2024 and a draft licence issued in January 2025. During the assent process, a number of representations against the draft licence were made by the objectors. Having received those representations, were there any issues in those representations that had not been considered when the licence was drafted?
So, Dr. Nathan Flood, it's difficult for me to answer that question completely because I wasn't involved in drafting the licence. I'm here to represent on technical matters. But from the communications I've reviewed, I'm aware that we have provided advice to the local authority on the process. We have obviously reviewed them as part of this process, and there are health and safety matters that have been identified. I think it's fair to say that in those health and safety matters on the representations, there's nothing that we think sits outside of the licensing framework that we would agree with, because it's covered by other regulatory systems. So there's nothing that we've seen that we don't think would have been considered as part of the process. But obviously I'm answering that on a technical basis and not part of the actual process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now we move on to the objectors. If Mrs. Wilkes, do you want to come first? Mr. Wilkes, okay. You can just state who you are again. Thank you.
James Wilkes. Hi. So we live in a house which is probably the closest to the site, which is why I'm concerned. In the original exclusion zones, I don't know where they came from, because once I was the one actually who messaged HSE questioning them. No one gave me any answers, including the Shropshire Council. And then when I did question them, they came back and said, no. And that's when we had the second letter come out with the larger zones, if you like. Now, my house is 276 metres, and my garden is 241. Is that okay that the garden is probably within the zone, if you like?
Matthew Davis, I'm the permissioning officer that did the licence. So the building, you helpfully sent in an image that let us identify which building you mean. It is that distance away from your house, but that building does not store or contain any explosives at all. The nearest explosives building is over 300 metres away, and your house is well outside the Class D distance of any explosive building. I've been through and double checked every single distance.
Okay.
Okay. So there are a couple of things. I see that you've said that everything's okay, but there was the change and the school, as the Esland school, coming into sort of use after the initial licence was looked at. So that concerned me, and I don't know if that would be considered an E. When you told us it might be a D still, didn't you? But because there are vulnerable children there, and I did read that there might not be assent given if there's a school adjacent to the site.
Okay, so Dr. Nathan Flood, so I'll pass over to Matt in a second to answer your question, but I just want to clarify just one point that you said. In what I've been through, I hope I didn't say it's all okay. What the important thing to understand about this whole system and the whole licensing framework is an explosive license essentially says that site is suitable from the regulatory basis to have that type of explosives in those locations for those activities, given what's around it and what's on the site. And then what Mr. Charles explained is that then there's an underpinning health and safety framework that ensures compliance with various regulations. So it all fits together. So it's just important to understand.
That's okay. I mean, did the landowner comply then? Because it seems it's such a big and important thing.
Mrs. Wilkes,
sorry.
Let's keep to the first question, which was
you want to know about
the school and whether that's within the area.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering whether he did comply with the regulations of the licence by then, subletting that built into the school.
Matthew Davis, Permissioning Officer. The question regarding the new school did come up quite a few times in the representations that we received. The reason, just to cover another part of that question that was asked quite commonly, the reason the other primary school was considered in terms of distances is because there is a possibility that due to the number of students that could attend that school, that it would actually be a place of Class C. Due to there being more of 100 people in one place regularly, it would be a place of public resort. So in essence, the kind of protected place of that school was made more critical to ensure that it was remained safe. The new school is a lot less likely to have 100 people on site regularly, and therefore would be treated as a place of Class D. And it is far outside the Class D distance, and the grounds of that school are also far outside the Class D distance.
The fact that because I've read that HMX, it's as if there's a risk that HMX can contaminate wastewater. I mean, we get a lot of flooding in that area. My garden, probably, like a fifth of it I can't use for a lot of the year, and the air and soil. And it says it can affect fish, animals, on contaminated land, and it's not known whether they build up levels of the HMX in their tissues. It says the EPA recommends a concentration of HMX in adults' drinking water to be less than 0.4 milligrams per litre for a lifetime. Obviously, it's adjacent to Severn Trent. If there did happen to be a spill or a leak, and that water was contaminated, that's the village, treatment. This the treatment works for there, the water supply. So what would take place potentially?
Okay, so Dr. Nathan Flood here. So I just want to double check. So I think the question you're asking is there a risk to the environment and to people's health from the chemicals and explosives?
To the water and to animals, and there's a stream as well, so the fish and plant life.
So I think it's probably important just to think about what could be on the site, because that's what we do. We always go from first principles. So essentially you will have chemicals on there which are going to be in low quantities, we would probably suggest, and those will be packaged before they've been processed. As we talked about, there's a health and safety framework that underpins, there's cost assessments, risk assessments. So handling those chemicals in those processes, I hope Mr. Kirkpatrick will be complying with the regulations around that, and we will be inspecting him to make sure that he is. And part of that is considering waste streams and where things go. You mentioned HMX and earlier RDX. So those explosives are what we call crystalline explosives. So they're solid material. So they're not very water soluble, which is one of the reasons that disposing of some explosives can be quite difficult, and burning is a preferred option. Most high explosives of the type that Mr. Kirkpatrick is looking at using on the site are what we call CHNO explosives. So they have carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen in them. And essentially when you burn them, you will get various reaction products that will come off of it. And they'll mostly be things like carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, carbon, oxygen and nitrogen gas. And those will just go into the atmosphere, and they'll be very low level. I mean, you would get a lot more from the exhaust of a car with regards to carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide than you would from an explosive. So there are things that need to be considered that are outside HSE's scope, but just for clarity, I can explain what they are. So any burning, you'll have to do that in line with Environment Agency policies. You might need a permit depending on what you're going to do, and all of that would need to be considered. With regard to the sewage treatment works, though, because that's a bit more of an interesting question, is one of the things that we would expect is that there would be liaison with the local fire authority, and that is part of the licensing process. And part of that is the fire authority will visit the site, and they will identify if there's a fire in any of the buildings or on site, how would they respond? And that will consider, if we fill this place with water, where could that flow to? So that will be considered as part of that process. I would also say the products that Mr. Kirkpatrick is wanting to make, once he's manufactured those, even if they were soaked in water, none of those explosives would run out. It's just not physically possible, because they're a solid polymeric mass of material that actually are quite hard to get rid of. So that's why, again, the burning route tends to go to that answer.
Okay. And the site being very close to houses, the firework facility, the gas tankers regularly travel through. What's the risk with that?
So Dr. Nathan Flood again. So let's take them slightly separately. So let's take the fireworks storage site first. So that's a lower tier coma site. So that has been a lower tier coma site. It gets inspections from us periodic times, and we check compliance with the regulations there. And as part of a coma site, they have to have a safety management system that's documented, and they have to have emergency procedures. So one of the things that site will have to consider is they will have to liaise with Mr. Kirkpatrick and Mosaic around any emergency response that takes place, because obviously the fire service don't want to deal with one issue and then something else happens. So the way the regulatory framework works is all of that is fed together. So that's the fireworks site on response. The gas cylinders, and just for clarity, is that LPG gas for houses?
I have LPG in my garden, but somebody had said that they have gas storage tankers that go through. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. So with regards to the LPG, we treat that from a licensing perspective as a Class D distance, because we view it as and our definition of that is bulk storage of dangerous goods. Can you remember how many litres? I always forget. 450 litres or more of material. So I remember quite a lot, but some things do fall through the gaps. And what that means is we offer a high level of protection, because we don't want some explosives to go off, communicate to that, and then that sets another event off. But as we've explained, because everything sits well outside of the Class D distance, we wouldn't view any gas around the site as an issue with regards to that.
You can just understand it from my perspective, that there's my garden, there's Mr. Kirkpatrick's Mosaic laboratories, there's the sewage works that obviously I don't know whether that could have methane as part of that there's the firework factory, there's the agricultural storage, and that's behind my garden, and it's just very worrying, really.
I know we're veering off slightly, but do you mind if I address that? So I completely understand that, and it's why we're here, and we're more than happy to answer any questions, because this is why this process exists, is so that you can have a say. And we really care about health and safety of both people who work for companies, but also members of the public. Is what we spend our lives dealing with. And HSE strategy is protecting people and places, so we fully understand that. And I think the challenge with this is, we spend our lives going to explosive sites, which are sometimes in heavy industrial areas, sometimes they're in the middle of nowhere. We have a site that's in the centre of London, which is quite eye-opening. We deal with the full range of it, and we, with our knowledge and how the framework works, we would not progress a licence to where it's got to now if we had any concerns over the health and safety matters. So the main thing is, has there been things that we've missed? And that's the main thing for this process. But it is also so you can ask us the questions. So we're more than happy to answer those. And I can appreciate when you've got lots of these things around your house. If I had them around my house, I'd be asking some questions as well. So I fully appreciate that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Alan Jones again. Just a couple of observations and questions for you. Obviously, it's a different level for the fireworks to the armaments. The licensing granting for fireworks, obviously the security is very lapsed there because there have been 4 break-ins recently. How can we be sure that the security for this, I know it's a different department again, the police still to be involved, will be as robust as it needs to be if we can't even control the fireworks side of it, and yet this is a totally different level of explosive.
Stuart Charles, HSE. So Nathan referred earlier to relevant explosives, and I think that's the key. In those terms, relevant explosives means things that other people, bad actors, might want to get hands on, and they attract a higher level of security generally, and that's some of the arrangements that we talked about already with the involvement of the.
There are 3 easy accesses, not through the main gate, but you can get in currently.
So it's about layers of protection. So you've got a secure outer boundary or an outer boundary, and then each building is hardened to provide protection. So there'll be alarms and a police response that's planned as well. So they're a different type of explosive from the fireworks, which aren't relevant explosives and wouldn't.
Right.
Attract that.
Well, say it's not work for fireworks. We're just concerned that we step it up considerably for this. And to reiterate what another colleague had said, drones, it's so commonplace now. I've got one that we haven't covered anything about drones access to the site.
So if I come to that, so Dr. Nathan Flood, Health and Safety Executive. So 2 questions there. So let's separate them out. So the first one was around the security that Stuart mentioned. I agree with his comments. There's just one point I did want to clarify, and you said we've gone up a level now on the sites. We do not view it like that. As far as we're concerned,
well, the council's the law and level of explosive is different on the council because they've never had to authorise this licence before in that area.
So the site licence at the previous place would have gone through the assent process when that site was first granted a licence. So it would have gone through exactly the same process. And in our view, it's just a different type of explosive. The only difference here is that this has relevant explosives. So there is now an additional security measure by having the police involved directly and issuing an explosive certificate. So we wouldn't view that as different. So I think it's worth clarifying that. I just want to mention one point as well. You mentioned that there's been reports of thefts around fireworks. I have to say that HSE is not aware of any thefts of any fireworks on the site. And what we would encourage is, if any members of the public thought that was the case, there are duties around recording explosives, and that will also apply to Mr. Kirkpatrick. And
we just assume it's been reported because we all know about it because we all live in the village.
So if anyone can go onto HSE's website, and whether you're an employee or a member of the public, you can put a concern into us. That will come through to us, and we will investigate it where appropriate. Okay. So that's that one. Your question around the drones. What I would say is there is a national security process that looks at this. Some of it I'm not going to talk about in a public hearing, which I hope you will appreciate.
I fly a drone. I'm licensed. So.
There are various measures that can be put in place where there is a credible risk, and that is what happens from a national security perspective. this is outside of HSE's remit, but I'm just trying to do this to assist the committee and hopefully just provide a bit of context for the public. So assessments are made based on what the risk level is, and then mitigatory steps can be put in place if required. But what I would say is that the police and Mr. Kirkpatrick also referred to the counter-terrorism officer. That's something that I would have expected to have considered. It is also a matter for the CAA. It's important to understand they are the main regulatory body around this. So from a licensing perspective, that's not something that would come under, in our view, the explosive license. It will be part of the security arrangements, which will then form part of the police.
I'm not sure the final question is pertinent to you or where, but in the village, from the previous armaments going back to the war 80 years ago, there's a very exponential increase in cancer in the village due to contamination. So that's why we're concerned about contaminating the brook, the land and everything around there. So is that thought about it?
Dr. Nathan Flood, Health and Safety Executive. So as part of the licensing process, it wouldn't. What should be in place, though, is that Mr. Kirkpatrick and Mosaic will need to ensure that they are complying with health and safety legislation, part of which will consider COSH assessments of the material properties that they have on site and ensure that there is no off-site risk. Because under Section 3 of the Health and Safety, etc., Health and Safety at Work, etc., Act 1974, they have a duty to the non-employees as well, to members of the public. So that's something that should fly my drone just to keep an eye on things to make sure they're complying. You should go and ask the CAA, that's what I'll tell you. Up to the fence. Right, thank you.
Anybody else objector-wise? No? So we'll move on to the next section. And that's the objectors who have made... Oh, sorry. Yes, committee members, have you got any questions?
I'll go in again. Thank you very much for deviating and giving me some additional information about the chemistry and things. Just for my benefit, presumably the packaging, which the explosive part obviously has, and it's been tested and it's safe for transport, the same kind of thing occurs to the packaging for the individual chemicals coming in. Yes?
Yes, so Dr. Nathan Flood, so yes, as part of the framework, there is another part of this called GHS, or Globally Harmonised System, which feeds into some other regulations, which also feeds into some EU directives that we still recognise in law. I won't go into all of that detail, but what I can say is that it's a legal requirement that every chemical sold has a safety data sheet. Most of people still refer to them as material safety data sheet. That should consider all the toxic, harmful effects of the environment, the flammability, all the material properties. That has to be assessed for each chemical, and then they're packaged in accordance with specific provisions based on the UN numbers. So that it all kind of feeds together.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, got ahead of myself there. So objectors who have made a representation can now present their case. So if you just remind you, you've got 3 minutes each. Anybody want to come and say anything?
But I'd just like to say, it's overall.
Can you say
Michelle
that?
will, sorry. And just to say overall, we're putting a lot of sort of, well, our faith in Mr. Kilpatrick that everything will go to, that everything will be safe. And it just, I just still want to object, because it really is, it's so close to my house. I know that health and safety wise, you can't bring up house prices, but I mean, so for my mental health, I sit here and I know that when I put my house on the market, that I'm going to potentially not get a buyer. So I just want to make the local authority aware that I am aware of the blight, the blight that you can get this compensation. And that's just it, I suppose. Yeah. So my house will, I'm sitting here, he's going to make lots of money from doing this, and the landowner will make lots of money. We've put all our work and our efforts into our property, and it'll be worth absolutely nothing with sewage treatment work behind it, and then him. So I'm just not happy.
Does anybody want to ask any questions regarding that? Licensed officer, no. Applicant? HSC? Committee?
Irene Jones.
Yeah, we're going to do one at a time. Oh, sorry.
I agree with Michelle regarding the house prices will fall. As my husband said, the transport will be 2 feet down the whole length of our cottage. I'm not happy about the transport. I don't believe it's safe. Or he chooses just these two, whatever they are. But how many of those is going to be in one transport van, which will make a big difference. If there's only, he's just showing these 2 little items. There could be hundreds in a van, as far as we know. But I'm not happy about this whatsoever. In fact, I will be trying to sell my house because I don't want that transport going past it. All my family lives in that village. I've got 3 children, grandchildren. We will be moving out. Thank you.
Can I just remind the objectors, just before we go any further, that it is relating to health and safety, and the emotive issue of what you think that your house is worth or things like that are not actually relevant. So this, it's not relevant to this committee, unfortunately. Sorry. So did anybody want to ask any questions of that objector? No? No. Okay. So the next one, sorry, was somebody else coming up then? Is it yourself, sir? Okay, thank you. So we now move to closing remarks from each party in the following order. So that's licensing officer first, then please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder that the purpose of the local authority assent procedure is for you to satisfy yourselves that the local factors bearing on the safety of the operation of the site or health and safety of members of the public have been considered and taken into consideration by HSE when they drafted the licence conditions. And in doing that, you can only consider matters relevant to the health and safety of members of the public and the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Sorry about that. HSC.
Nothing further from us, thank you.
Does anybody from the objectors want to say anything more? A sort of summary or a roundup? No?
Gary Alton, local resident. Just to say that obviously mental health has been affected by it all, which I know isn't really health and safety. House prices we can't talk about, but we all have to live in the village, and we don't feel that the site is suitable and there could have been a better site found. We think it might have been chosen because it's been used for that previously, but obviously the village was a very different place in the 40s to what it is now, and weapons and explosives were very different in the 40s to where they are now. And yeah, I think that's about it. Not really much. So I think everything else has been said. Our concerns about transport and our children and the number of people in the village and fire at the plant, chemicals, explosives. I think everyone summed up what we think. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Alton, thank you. So any necessary comments, clarification from the legal officer?
Nothing to add or clarify.
So as the chair, it's my job now to sum up. I think we've give it a good go today. Everybody's had their opportunity to say what they needed to say. I think we've got some excellent clarification from HSE. I was concerned that you went over your 3 minutes, but I understand why, and I think it did clarify quite a lot of the things that perhaps the objectors come here hadn't had their opportunity to speak to you and clarify that. The local authority must notify the applicant and the relevant licensed authority of its decision within 7 days of making it. As a committee, we won't make the decision in front of you now. So effectively, I'm going to close the meeting, then we go off into another room, or we stay here and everybody goes, I don't know which, and then we'll consider it. Do we let the objectors know as well? It doesn't mention that. There's no requirement. Okay, but we'll put that notice somewhere, will we, or not? Or don't we know? Okay. And that's it then. Thank you very much, everybody, for bearing with us for an hour and a half for that for this meeting. Thank you.